The story I want to tell you is about my grandfather, Frank Gomez Rodriguez. My grandpa was born on a ranch in San Jose, California, July 22, 1918. While my grandfather lived a long and productive life, full of experiences, the one I'm most proud of is the time he spent in the Army during World War II. My grandfather, along with his 10 siblings, grew up on a ranch in San Jose, California. His father and mother immigrated to the United States from Spain in 1907. Life was not easy for him and his family, and the ranch barely provided enough income for the roof over his head and food on the table. My grandpa was dedicated to his family and dropped out of school in 8th grade to help on the ranch and make ends meet. My grandfather's first job away from the ranch was at age 23, when he and other family members found jobs working at the shipyards in Richmond, California. The year was 1941, and on a weekend off at a dance in San Jose, he met my grandmother, Ann Valverde. 1 year later, they were married and moved into a small house in Sunnyvale, California. Within a year, they had their first son, Frank, and everything was going very well. In May 1944, my grandfather received a draft notice in the mail. In September 1944, my grandfather, along with other draftees, were transported by train up to Fort Lewis, Washington for basic training. This was my grandfather's first time traveling out of state and away from his family. I would imagine it must have been very hard and nerve-wracking experience leaving your family behind and traveling to places where he has never been before and not knowing what the future holds. Basic training in the Army was 12 weeks duration. I'm sure that my grandpa excelled at boot camp due to the type of hard work he experienced daily at the ranch when he was younger. If you knew my grandfather, you would know that he was always trying to find a way to earn a buck. Even during boot camp, he would take orders for dried fruits and candies from his fellow recruits at 50 cents a box, while he was purchasing them from my grandmother's at 25 cents a box. From what I heard, he had quite the business going. At Fort Lewis, my grandfather made friends that he wrote about in letters home to my grandmother. One in particular, T.F. Vaughn, he grew particularly close to. T.F. Vaughn also left a young wife and child as my grandfather did in Los Angeles, California. My grandfather was attached to the 96th Infantry Division under the command of General Claudius Easley. My grandfather volunteered for extra training during boot camp and ended up being assigned the position of a combat medic. In January 1945, basic training was over and the troops of the 96th Infantry Division were allowed 1 week leave to go home before they boarded transport ships to the Pacific Theater for battle. My grandfather and his fellow soldiers of the 96th Infantry's first stop was Hawaii for additional training. They again boarded transport ships and headed for the island of Okinawa. The invasion started April 1, 1945. The Battle for Okinawa was a particularly horrible experience that my grandfather would never forget. The battle lasted almost 3 months, of which 75% of it was living in a foxhole. On the 35th day of the invasion, my grandfather got word that his friend, T.F. Vaughn, was killed in action attacking one of the many hills in Okinawa. I can't imagine how he felt, nor did he discuss his feelings to any of us. My grandfather's daily job on Okinawa was to be one of the 2 medics attached to a 15-man platoon attacking hill after hill. Once a soldier was injured, it was my grandfather's job to render aid and evacuate the soldier to safety and then return to his platoon. My grandpa did recall nights in the rain-filled foxhole, not daring to peek his head over the top due to the sounds of bullets continually whizzing by. 5 days prior to the end of the Okinawa campaign, my grandfather was involved in one particular battle known as the Battle of Obi Hill. My grandfather and the other medic in his platoon had to evacuate over 28 wounded soldiers, in which was described as forward of the front lines, with incoming fire so intense, and the medics had to be covered by Allied tank fire. During the battle, my grandfather received another wound on his wrist, but was still able to complete the mission. For his heroics that day, he was awarded the Bronze Star for acts of courage and heroism under impossible odds. By June 22nd, the Battle of Okinawa was over, and the 96th Infantry Division had killed over 25,000 enemy soldiers, but at a high cost. With over 1,600 Americans killed and 5,000 injured, it was said that if you fought in the Battle of Okinawa, you were either killed or wounded. My grandfather returned from the war, had 2 more kids, and prospered in real estate. He passed away in 2002. This story is mostly due to the information I have gathered from reading information from my grandpa's army book and interviews with my father. While I knew my grandfather, he never did speak of the war. When I talked to my dad about my grandpa and his war experience, my dad said that grandpa did not like talking about the war. We believe that soldiers who experience combat are forever scarred with memories that are too emotional to speak of, and to have survived a war while at the cost of so many of your friends must be a heavy cross to bear. I can understand that.